I want to tell you about two couples. They're the same age, they're both 65, they have the same amount saved, both $1 million, and they have the same investments. 25 years later, one of them is totally fine. They're right on track. The other one, they ran out of money 8 years ago, and they've been living almost entirely on Social Security ever since. So what happened? Well, let's get into it. But before we do, if we haven't met yet, my name's Ryan Kravitz. I'm a certified financial planner professional, and I help people transition into and through retirement. And I want to walk through this today because I think it's one of the most misunderstood risks in retirement. And it's not because it's complicated, but because it's basically it's invisible until it gets too late. Now, these are hypothetical couples that I'm talking about here. So I'm just going to call them the Smiths and the Jones. So both retire at 65 with $1 million saved. Both plan to take out $55,000 a year, adjusted for inflation. Now, that's a 5.5% withdrawal rate, and that's a little higher than the more conservative 4% that a lot of people have heard of. But it's not unusual at all for someone that wants to enjoy their retirement, especially in those earlier years in retirement, and is also willing to be more flexible with their spending if they need to be. Now, both of them are invested about 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds. So they both have the same hand dealt to them. So they're both retired and life is good. And at some point early in retirement, the market has a rough year and the overall portfolio drops about 17%. Now, a drop like that on a balanced portfolio isn't something that happens every year, at least not historically. But it's not a rare event either. I mean, it happened in 2008, and it also happened in 2022, most recently, here a few years back. You know, the 60-40 portfolio in 2022, it dropped about 17% for the calendar year, and it actually dropped over 20% from the peak to the trough, meaning the high point to the low point before it started recovering. Over a 25 or a 30-year retirement, you should expect to see something like this happen perhaps multiple times. And at a 5.5% withdrawal rate, the timing of when it happens matters a lot. I mean, both couples are still counting on that $55,000. I mean, certainly the markets don't care. So to understand what happened to each of them, I want to show you something that I think will actually surprise you. And to keep it simpler, I'm not going to adjust the numbers here for inflation. So I'm just going to assume a flat $55,000 withdrawal each year. So scenario one, the portfolio has a good start. It goes up 10% the first year, up 20% the second year, and then down 15% the third. And so after 3 years and 3 withdrawals of $55,000 each, you now have about $957,000. Scenario two, same exact returns, just in a different order. So down 15% the first, then up 20%, and then up 10%. So same returns, same withdrawals, but now you only have $927,000 approximately. So that's about $30,000 less, just from the order that those returns came in. Now, this is why we don't look at average returns when we're planning for retirement. It's not about what the average is. It's about the order those returns come in and how consistent they are. And when you're pulling money out every single year, well, that matters more than most people realize. I mean, the Smiths essentially ended up in scenario two. They just didn't know it was coming. And here's what makes it so dangerous. You can't see it happening in real time. It's not just the damage done during the down year. It's everything those lost gains would have earned for the next perhaps 20 plus years. And that gap compounds. Every year it gets a little bit bigger. And by year 10, well, the gap gets much bigger than it was in year 3. By year 20, I mean, it can be quite a bit. And so the risk in retirement isn't spread across 25 years, 30 years. It's really concentrated in that first 5 to 10. I mean, that's when a downturn does the most damage, because that's when you have the most time left now for a smaller portfolio to work against you. Now, here's where the Smiths and the Jones start to look really different. And I want to be careful here because I don't think the Smiths just ignored the problem. I mean, when the markets dropped, they probably did pull back a little. Maybe they skipped a dinner out here and there. Maybe they thought twice before booking a trip, things like that. I mean, most people would. And also both couples had some short-term bonds and cash-like investments as a part of that 40% that was in bonds. So it's not like the Smiths had zero cushion, but having cash in the portfolio and having a plan for how to use it are two very different things. I mean, the Smiths had the cushion, they just didn't have the plan. There was no specific trigger that said, okay, at this point, this is when we can adjust. There was no clarity on how much to pull back, and maybe most importantly, no signal that was telling them when it was safe to spend normally again. So they were just guessing. And when you're guessing, you might pull back too much and then unnecessarily reduce your lifestyle for years, or not enough. And then that could quietly damage the portfolio. Or you might stay cautious, for too long after the market has recovered because nobody ever told you that it was okay to ease back up and that you could actually spend more. And over the course of 25 years, I mean, that kind of uncertainty is really expensive. And the Joneses had a completely different experience. And it wasn't because they were smarter, but because before they ever retired, they had already built a specific plan for what they would do if the market dropped early in retirement. They figured out where the flexibility was in their budget, the needs versus the wants, what had to get paid every month no matter what, and where there was room to pull back if they needed to. And then they built in what's called the guardrail strategy. It's basically a system that looks at how much they have, how much they're taking out, how long the money may need to last, and what other incomes they have coming in, like Social Security. And this tells them specifically when to adjust spending and by how much. It's not a gut feeling, it's an actual number. And the whole point of it is this, is that when the markets drop, especially early in retirement, instead of guessing, you have a system that tells you exactly what to do. And that same system tells them when conditions have then improved enough that it makes sense to then ease back up and to actually be able to spend more. It gets reviewed regularly and updated as things change, as they get older and as Social Security kicks in and as the portfolio grows or as it shrinks and all these different things. It's not something that you just set once and then forget about. And so when the market dropped, the Joneses didn't have to guess. They had a plan. They already knew that if their portfolio fell to a certain level, not just a bad week here and there or things like that, but actually to a meaningful sustained drop. They knew what that number is, that was the signal then to pull back spending. And then they knew by how much they actually would have to reduce their spending. Now, not dramatically. In their case, maybe 5 or 10% less on the discretionary stuff. Maybe a trip got delayed or a bigger purchase got pushed out a year or two or things like that. The goal was to then adjust the discretionary spending first, not the basic expenses. And they weren't just sitting there wondering, if they were doing the right thing, because the framework told them that they were. They also knew that if the portfolio grew to a certain level, that was then the signal where they would be able to spend more. And then they knew by how much more they would be able to spend. And that's what gave them also, the confidence to be able to enjoy their retirement more as well. And there was one other part of the plan too. The portfolio wasn't just sitting there. It was being rebalanced regularly. So as the market moved around, it was periodically brought back in line with its targets, because in a down market, that often means buying more of what dropped, even though it never feels good to buy when everything is dropping. And that's really the whole difference. I mean, not the market, not the investments. So what actually happened here in this hypothetical example? The Smiths kept pulling the $55,000 a year and adjusting here and there by feel, but never really having the confidence in knowing if what they were doing was enough. Are they spending too little? Are they spending too much? And for a while, for them, it looked fine. In year 3 and year 5 and year 10, it probably didn't look like a failure. It just probably looked like a portfolio that was maybe running a little bit lower than they had expected. But the damage kept compounding. And in somewhere around year 17, the money was gone. Now, from that point on, Social Security was pretty much all they had. And for most people, that's not the retirement that they spent decades working towards. The Joneses made it through the rough stretch with their spending adjusted, their portfolio rebalancing, and their growth investments still working for them. They participated in every recovery after that. And 25 years later, they're right where they expected to be. And I want to be really clear here. The Smiths weren't bad with money. They just never had the right conversation before they retired. Nobody ever sat down with them and really mapped out what they'd actually do when things got hard. And by the time it mattered, it was too late to then build that plan from scratch. So if you're a few years from retirement, or if you're already there, here's what I think about. Do you know what you'd actually do if the market dropped significantly, especially early in retirement? Not as a hypothetical. Actually think through it. How much would it have to drop to, and if it got to that point, how much would you then reduce your spending? What would make sense? Where would the money come from? What would you cut? And then how would you know when it was then okay to then ease back up? Does your portfolio have a rebalancing process built in? Because in a down market, the rebalancing isn't just tidying things up. It's part of the process that keeps the portfolio aligned with the plan. And also, have you ever had a real conversation about your needs versus your wants? Because that's where the flexibility lives. And if you know where that flexibility is before you need it, well, you'll know exactly what to do when the market tests you, and it will test you. If you don't have a specific plan for what you do when the market drops, how much you reduce spending, when you'd increase it, and by how much, not just a gut feeling, but an actual system, that's worth a real conversation. There's a link in the description if you want to learn more about how I work with people and explore what it might look like for us to work together. I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.